The rain drummed softly against the windows of the dimly lit apartment, streaking down in long, glistening trails that distorted the view of the street below. A dull, flickering lamplight cast elongated shadows across the body, sprawled on the floor. A man in his late 50s, elegantly dressed in a dark suit. His arms were stretched out to the sides, as if in some final act of surrender, his expression strangely serene. Inspector Louis Marceau of the Paris Brigade Criminelle stood just inside the doorway, his keen eyes scanning the scene. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic, blood, though there was barely any visible. The man's shirt was pristine, except for a single, precise wound just beneath the rib cage. A thin trickle of crimson had soaked into the carpet beneath him, but the smile on his face was what unsettled Marceau the most. "Who found him?" Marceau asked, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of curiosity. The uniformed officer beside him, a young man named Dupont, cleared his throat. "His housekeeper, Inspector, Madame Fournier. She arrived at her usual time this morning and found him like this. No sign of forced entry, no apparent struggle, just this." Marceau crouched down, studying the man's face. The smile was neither grimace nor mockery. It was as if he had welcomed death with open arms. That was unusual enough, but something else caught his eye. A single chess piece lay on the desk beside him, positioned neatly in the center. The White King. Was he known to play? Marceau asked. Dupont hesitated before shaking his head. Not that anyone mentioned. Marceau straightened and glanced around the apartment. It was tastefully decorated, suggesting wealth but not extravagance. A bookshelf stood to the side, its contents meticulously arranged. The absence of personal photographs was notable, making the space feel impersonal despite its lived-in elegance. His name? Alain Duval, Inspector. Retired businessman. No family, no known enemies. Just an ordinary man who seems to have died under anything but ordinary circumstances. Marceau turned to the housekeeper, a frail woman clutching a handkerchief between trembling fingers. Madame Fournier, you said you found him like this? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Oui, Inspector. He was always up before I arrived, but today there was no answer when I knocked. I used my key and... She pressed the handkerchief to her lips, stifling a sob. I don't understand. He was in good spirits yesterday. And that smile... It's as if he knew something we didn't, Marceau frowned. A man murdered with surgical precision, no sign of a break-in, and a chess piece left behind as a cryptic message. There was something deliberate about it, something calculated. Tell me, he said, fixing his gaze on the housekeeper. Did he ever speak of being afraid? Did he receive any visitors recently? She shook her head quickly. No, Inspector, he was a private man, but he wasn't fearful. If anything, he seemed relieved about something lately, almost at peace. As if a burden had been lifted, relieved, at peace, and then dead. Marceau studied the crime scene once more, his mind already mapping out the possibilities. The nature of the wound suggested an experienced hand, someone precise, methodical. The placement of the chess piece hinted at an intention beyond simple. Murder? Perhaps a message, a warning, or an unfinished game that only Duval had understood. The door had been locked from the inside. No forced entry, no witnesses. The only thing out of place was the man's final expression. Marceau exhaled slowly. This was no ordinary murder. It was the beginning of a game. And someone had just made their first move. Inspector Louis Marceau lingered over the crime scene as the forensic team worked methodically around him, dusting, for prints, taking photographs and cataloguing every detail. The faint hum of voices and the occasional click of a camera filled the space, but Marceau's mind was elsewhere. He turned back toward the body, his sharp eyes sweeping across Alain Duval's still form, searching for what had been overlooked. The chess piece, the White King, rested precisely at the center of the desk, its placement too deliberate to be coincidence. He resisted the urge to pick it up, instead studying its alignment. It wasn't merely placed, it was positioned. But for what purpose? A message, certainly. But from whom? He let his gaze wander beyond the obvious. The desk was neat, nothing out of place aside from the chess piece. The bookshelves were orderly, the titles methodical, literature, philosophy, history. Duval had been a man of intellect, perhaps a strategist in his own way. Yet something tugged at Marceau's instincts, a missing variable. Then he saw it. A thin layer of dust on the shelf closest to the desk had been disturbed. It wasn't a full handprint, nor was it the work of a casual brush against the surface. No, this was more precise. Something had been removed recently. The clean outline of an absent object. Marceau gestured toward the forensic photographer. "Take a shot of this space on the shelf." The man nodded and snapped a few frames. Dupont, still hovering near the doorway, noticed Marceau's shift in focus. "Something missing?" Marceau tilted his head slightly, considering. "Looks that way. Did his housekeeper mention anything?" "Being out of place." Dupont flipped through his notes. "No, but I can ask her again." Before he could step away, Marceau spoke again. "One more thing." "His schedule. Did she say if he was expecting anyone last night?" "She said no one ever visited, Inspector. The man lived like a ghost." Marceau exhaled through his nose. "Ghosts don't leave puzzles behind." His attention returned to the bookshelf. Whatever had been removed, it had been taken deliberately. But by whom? Duval himself? Or someone else? A noise from the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. A woman's voice, sharp, slightly irritated, filtered in from the foyer. Marceau turned just as a tall, dark-haired woman stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She was in her mid-40s, elegant but restrained in her appearance, dressed in a navy coat that fit her slender frame with military precision. "I assume someone will tell me why my uncle is dead," she said coolly. Dupont cleared his throat. "And you are?" "Claire Duval," she answered. Her gaze flicked to the body, but she barely reacted. "His niece." Marceau studied her as she stepped further into the room. There was no visible grief, no sign of shock. Just composed detachment. He had seen enough people react to death to know when someone was holding back. The question was, why? "You were close?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "Not particularly." Her eyes moved to the chess piece, then back to Marceau. "But I see you've already found what he wanted you to." Marceau's pulse quickened, though his expression remained unreadable. "What do you mean?" Claire Duval gave a small, mirthless smile. "That piece. My uncle wasn't a chess player, Inspector, but he did enjoy a good game." Marceau considered her words, noting the slight shift in her tone. There was something in her voice, an edge that didn't quite match her indifference. "You seem unsurprised," he said. "I know my uncle," she replied. He had secrets, and he had a way of ensuring they surfaced when the time was right. Marceau took a step closer. "And is this the time?" She tilted her head, studying him as if assessing whether he was worth the truth. "That depends." "Inspector, are you the type to see the board for what it is, or are you just another piece being moved?" Marceau held her gaze, unshaken. I prefer to be the one making the moves, Mademoiselle Duval. For the first time, her composure cracked, just slightly. An almost imperceptible flicker of something in her eyes. Approval? Amusement? Or something else entirely? She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. My uncle sent me this 2 days ago. No note, just this. Marceau took the paper and unfolded it carefully. It was a printed news article clipped from Le Monde. The headline read, "Retired financier found dead in hotel room. Suicide or something." More? He scanned the article quickly. A man named Bernard Letourneau, a former business associate of Alain Duval, had been found dead in a luxury hotel 2 nights ago. The cause of death was still under investigation, but initial reports suggested suicide. Marceau looked up at Claire. What was his connection to your uncle? She crossed her arms. That's your job to find out, isn't it? There it was again. That carefully controlled detachment. But Marceau could feel it now, something underneath. Something she wasn't saying. "Where were you last night, Mademoiselle Duval?" he asked casually. Her lips curved in the faintest trace of a smirk. "Are you asking if I killed my uncle, Inspector?" "I'm asking where you were." "I was in Lyon for work," she said without hesitation. "You're welcome to confirm it." Marceau nodded. He would. But something told him Claire Duval was not a woman who left loose ends. If she was lying, he wouldn't catch her easily. He glanced back at the chess piece one last time. A king left behind, a missing object from the shelf. A business associate, found dead days before Duval's own murder. And now a niece who wasn't mourning. Yes, this was a game. But Marceau had played before, and he never lost. Inspector Louis Marceau folded the newspaper clipping carefully, slipping it into his coat pocket as he watched Claire Duval. Her expression remained calm, composed, but he had learned long ago that still waters often concealed the deepest currents. He would verify her alibi, of course, but something told him that even if she had nothing to do with the crime directly, she was not uninvolved. He turned back to Dupont. "Have we spoken to the neighbours?" Dupont nodded. Most of them heard nothing. The walls in this building are thick, and Duval wasn't the social type. But one tenant, 3rd floor, said he saw a man leaving around 10 last night. He didn't get a clear look, just a dark coat and a hat. Marceau absorbed this. And did he see Duval receive any visitors earlier in the evening? No one. Unusual. Just the housekeeper leaving at her usual time. Marceau glanced at Claire. "When was the last time you saw your uncle?" She considered for a moment, then answered, "About a month ago. He asked to meet for coffee." That in itself was unusual. He never reached out unless he had a reason. And what was the reason? Her lips pressed together briefly before she spoke. "He wanted to know if I still had my father's letters." Marceau tilted his head slightly. "Your father?" She nodded. "Mathieu Duval, my uncle's younger brother. He died years ago. I kept some of his things, letters, documents. My uncle asked about them out of nowhere." "Did he say why?" "No, and I didn't ask." Marceau found that difficult to believe, but he let it sit for now. "And did you still have them?" "Yes." "Did you give them to him?" Her gaze flickered. No, something in her tone changed ever so slightly, a fraction too controlled. Marceau studied her. "Because you didn't want to?" "Because he didn't need them." That was an answer, dressed as a deflection. Marceau held her gaze a beat longer before shifting his attention back to the crime scene. The forensic team was nearly finished. "We'll need those letters," he said finally. Claire's expression didn't change. Of course, Marceau nodded once. He would follow up on that soon, but there were other voices he needed to hear first. Madame Fournier sat stiffly in the worn chair of the station's interview room, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her grief seemed genuine, though Marceau had learned that sadness and guilt often wore the same face. "You said your employer seemed relieved lately," he began, as if a burden had been lifted. "Did he say anything specific?" She shook her head. "Not in so many words, but he was different. Lighter, I suppose. I thought—" She hesitated. Marceau waited. "You thought?" She exhaled softly. "I thought he might have settled something. He had been worried for some time, but he never told me why. And yet you noticed it?" "Yes." Marceau leaned forward slightly. "Did he mention Bernard Le Tourneau?" Her brow creased. "That name sounds familiar. He was found dead 2 nights ago. Your employer sent his niece a news clipping about it. If Duval was worried, do you think it was connected?" She looked genuinely uncertain. I don't know. But if he sent her something, it means he suspected something, doesn't it?" Marceau didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Did anyone visit him recently? Anyone out of the ordinary?" She hesitated. "There was a man last week. I only caught a glimpse of him. He came in just as I was leaving. He was tall, well-dressed. Something about him made me uneasy." Marceau's instincts sharpened. "Did you hear their conversation?" "No. But you had a feeling?" She nodded. "My employer was not a man easily intimidated. But that day, there was something in his posture when he greeted the man, something I hadn't seen before." "And what was that?" She swallowed. "Fear." Marceau let that settle. "Did Duval ever play chess?" he asked finally. She looked puzzled. "No, he never did." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. The next interview took place in the same room. Marceau sat across from Pierre Lamarque, Duval's former business partner. He was in his 60s, well-groomed, with the air of a man accustomed to talking his way out of difficult situations. "I haven't spoken to Alain in years," he said smoothly. "We parted ways after we sold the company." "And yet," Marceau said, "you sent him an email last week." Lamarck's expression remained steady. "I did. I reached out, a simple courtesy." Marceau said nothing, only watching him. Lamarck exhaled through his nose. "Fine, it wasn't just courtesy. I heard some rumors about Bernard Le Tourneau." "And what did you hear?" "That he was in trouble. And when Bernard was in trouble, that usually meant trouble for others." Marceau steepled his fingers. "Including Duval?" Lamarck's smile was brief and humorless. "If Bernard was involved, then yes." Marceau tapped his fingers against the table. "What kind of trouble?" Lamarck hesitated. "Financial, legal. Bernard was never careful, and he never knew when to walk away." "And Duval?" "He knew when to walk away, but sometimes the past doesn't let you." Marceau considered that. "Did Duval say anything to you when you reached out?" Lamarck hesitated again, just a fraction too long. "No? A lie?" Marceau let the silence stretch, watching the man shift slightly in his chair. Then he stood. "That will be all for now, Monsieur Lamarck." Lamarck rose, adjusting his cuffs. "I do hope you find whoever did this, Inspector." Marceau watched him leave, his mind already mapping the next move. Duval was afraid of something or someone, and the people around him were all playing their own version of the truth, some too willing to cooperate, others holding back, and beneath it all, a game still waiting to be uncovered. Marceau sat in his office, the dim light from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the collection of notes and evidence spread before him. The case was a puzzle of half-truths and misdirection, with every suspect providing just enough to appear cooperative while holding something back. He tapped a finger against the edge of the newspaper clipping Claire Duval had given him. Bernard Letourneau, dead. Officially a suicide. 2 nights later, Alain Duval is murdered. Coincidence? Unlikely. The motives stretched in every direction, but no single thread tied everything together. Letourneau had been in trouble, financial, legal, perhaps worse. Pierre Lamarck had all but admitted that Duval could have been at risk because of their past dealings, and then there was Claire, withholding the details of her father's letters, offering just enough information to make herself seem useful without ever truly answering his questions. He took a deep breath and reached for his phone. It was time to start unraveling the web. Marceau found Claire Duval in her uncle's study, her fingers lightly grazing the edge of the bookshelf. The space had been cleaned, the forensic team having taken what they needed, yet something about the room still felt arranged. "You said your uncle wanted your father's letters," Marceau said, stepping inside. "Did he give any indication why?" She didn't turn immediately, her fingers tracing the wood grain. "No, but I suspect he thought they contained something important." "Did they?" She finally faced him, her expression measured. "Not that I saw. Old correspondences, business talk, the occasional personal note. Nothing that should have mattered now." Marceau studied her carefully. "Then why didn't you give them to him?" Her lips pressed together slightly. "Because my uncle never asked for anything unless he needed it. And I wanted to know why before I handed them over." Marceau nodded slowly. "And did you ever find out?" Pause. The flicker of something in her eyes. "No." Another half-truth. "Where are the letters now?" She hesitated, then moved toward a leather satchel resting against the desk. She retrieved a bundle of aged envelopes tied neatly with a string and placed them in his hands. "I was going to burn them after he died," she admitted quietly. "But I thought you might want to see them first." Marceau untied the string, flipping through the delicate pages. At first glance they were nothing remarkable. Routine exchanges between 2 brothers with an occasional reference to business. But then, one letter caught his eye. The ink slightly smudged as if written in haste. "I told you to stay away from Letourneau. If you continue, you'll regret it." "These men do not forgive." Marceau looked up sharply. "Did you read this?" Claire shook her head. "Not all of them." The words suggested more than a simple business dispute. They hinted at something deeper, something dangerous. Marceau's mind worked quickly. If Alain Duval had feared Letourneau's dealings, then why had Letourneau been the one to die first? Had someone silenced him to protect Duval? Or had Duval orchestrated something that backfired? And then, who had killed Duval himself? Marceau tucked the letters into his coat. "You hesitated when I asked where they were." Claire exhaled softly. "Because I wasn't sure if giving them to you was the right move." "Why?" "Because I don't trust you yet." He didn't smile, but there was something almost approving in his gaze. "Then we're even." Next, Marceau visited Pierre Lamarck at his office, a sleek, glass-walled space in the business district. The man's confidence had not wavered since their last meeting, but Marceau saw something new in the way Lamarck clasped his hands together, controlled tension. "You didn't tell me everything about Letourneau," Marceau said without preamble. Lamarck sighed. "I didn't see the need." Let me be the judge of that. Lamarck leaned back slightly. Fine. Letourneau was in over his head. He owed the wrong people money. And Alain might have been pulled in. Might have been? Lamarck's lips pressed into a thin line. We had an understanding, Inspector. After we sold the company, Alain and I kept our distance from that world. Letourneau didn't. And yet, Alain was afraid of something. Lamarck hesitated, then spoke carefully. Fear isn't always about what you've done. Sometimes it's about what you know. Marceau absorbed that. What did Alain know? Lamarck exhaled slowly. He knew the kind of people Bernard was involved with, and he knew they wouldn't stop at Bernard if they thought someone else had information. Marceau's eyes narrowed. You're saying Alain was a loose end? Lamarck gave a small, resigned nod. And loose ends get cut. Marceau's pulse quickened. If Alain Duval's murder was tied to Letourneau's debts, then someone had cleaned house. The question was who, and why had they left the chess piece? By the time Marceau reached the precinct, Dupont was waiting with new information. Letourneau's financials were a disaster, Dupont reported. Owed money to several people, some legitimate, some not. And Alain Duval. Nothing suspicious on paper, but I checked his phone records. He called Letourneau 3 times the night Letourneau died. Marceau leaned against his desk. So they spoke. And 2 days later, Duval ends up dead. Dupont hesitated. It gets stranger. We pulled footage from a nearby ATM the night of Letourneau's death. Someone withdrew a large sum from his account. Shortly before he was found, Marceau's brow furrowed. Who? Dupont slid a grainy, still frame across the desk. Can't see the face, but look at the coat. A dark coat, high collar, the same description as the figure seen leaving Duval's apartment, the night he was murdered. A single question pulsed in Marceau's mind. Had Duval been cleaning up Letourneau's mess, or had someone else been tying up loose ends? The web was tightening, and the killer was still out there. Marceau stared at the grainy image from the ATM footage. The figure in the dark coat, their face obscured, moved with purpose. Withdraw, pocket the money, leave. Efficient, almost too calm. The timestamp put the transaction just an hour before Letourneau was found dead. If Letourneau had owed money to dangerous people, someone had made sure his debt was settled one way or another. But was it a killer collecting payment, or silencing him permanently? Dupont folded his arms. We ran a check on Letourneau's account. The withdrawal was nearly everything he had left. Whoever took it didn't just want him dead, they wanted him bled dry first. Marceau's mind turned back to Alain Duval. 2 nights later, another death. The connection between them had been murky, but now it was impossible to ignore. If Duval had been afraid, it wasn't paranoia, it was foresight. He had seen what was coming. Any matches on the coat? Marceau asked. Dupont shook his head. Too common, and no clear angle on the face. Marceau exhaled. Someone's covering their tracks. Dupont hesitated. Maybe not well enough. Marceau lifted an eyebrow. An informant reached out, Dupont said he had information about Letourneau's debts, claims he knows who came to collect. Marceau grabbed his coat. Then let's go. The meeting took place in a dimly lit café on Rue des Petits Champs, a place where no one asked questions as long as you paid for your coffee. The informant, a wiry man with restless hands, glanced over his shoulder twice before speaking. You're looking at this all wrong, he muttered. Letourneau wasn't just in debt. He was desperate. He had a plan to get out. Marceau leaned forward. What kind of plan? The man licked his lips. He was going to hand something over, something big. Hand it over to who? The man hesitated, then whispered, Alain Duval. Marceau went very still. You're sure? The man nodded rapidly. Saw them together a week ago. Duval wasn't happy. Looked like he didn't want anything to do with it. What? Was Le Tourneau trying to give him? I don't know, but whatever it was, someone didn't want it getting out. Marceau felt the puzzle shifting. Le Tourneau had been trying to buy his way out of trouble, but with what? And Duval, a man who had tried to keep his hands clean, had been unwillingly dragged back in. If he had known what Le Tourneau was caught up in, maybe he had been seen as a liability. Dupont's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, then looked up sharply. Boss, we've got a suspect. The suspect's name was Philippe Moreau, a known associate of Le Tourneau's creditors. His record was littered with financial crimes, extortion, fraud, a few violent incidents that had conveniently never led to conviction. And he had been caught on security footage near Duval's building the night of the murder. Marceau and Dupont watched as Moreau was brought into the interrogation room, his expression caught somewhere between defiance and amusement. He sat back, arms crossed. I don't know what you think you've got, Moreau said, but you're wasting your time. Marceau placed the grainy ATM still on the table. This is you, isn't it? Moreau barely glanced at it. Can't tell. Too blurry. And yet, Marceau continued, placing another image down, this one, security footage from Duval's street, time-stamped just an hour before the estimated time of death. This is much clearer. Moreau's jaw tightened for the briefest second. You followed Duval, Marceau pressed. What did he have that was worth killing for? Moreau scoffed. You think I killed him? He spread his arms. Look, Le Tourneau was an idiot. Owed money he couldn't pay, tried to weasel his way out. And yeah, maybe I was sent to collect. But Duval, not my job. Marceau's eyes didn't waver. Then whose job was it? Moreau's smirk faltered. Dupont leaned in. We've got enough to put you in that apartment building the night Duval died. Maybe you didn't kill him, but you know who did, and if you don't talk, you'll go down for it. Moreau exhaled through his nose. All right, fine, I was there. But when I got there, he was already dead. Marceau remained silent, letting the weight of Moreau's words settle. Moreau leaned forward. You want to know what's funny, Inspector? The guy who did it, he wasn't there to steal anything. The place was untouched. This wasn't about money. It was personal. Marceau studied him carefully. You saw him? Moreau hesitated, then shook his head. Didn't need to. The way the place was left, it was a message. Duval wasn't just killed, he was silenced. Silenced. The word rang in Marceau's mind like a struck bell. Moreau was handed over to the prosecutors and the case seemed solved. The press seized on the news. Le Tourneau's debts had caught up with him, and Duval had been another casualty of that same underworld. The department was ready to close the file, but Marceau couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Moreau had been near Duval's building, but he hadn't gone inside. And if he wasn't the killer, then who was, and why had they left the chess piece? Marceau sat in his office that night, staring at the board he had started arranging. Photographs, notes, timelines. The police had their suspect. The case was considered solved, but Marceau knew better. Somewhere in the shadows, the real killer was still watching. Waiting, and it wasn't over yet. Marceau sat in his dimly lit office, the glow from his desk lamp, illuminating the chess piece beside the crime scene photos. A knight toppled over. The detail had gnawed at him from the start, its placement too deliberate to be meaningless. Moreau's arrest had given the department an easy conclusion, but it was a facade, one Marceau wasn't willing to accept. The pieces didn't fit. He ran a hand over the stack of letters Claire Duval had given him. Somewhere in these old pages, buried beneath routine business and strained familial ties, was the ghost of something dangerous. Letourneau's debts had been real. Duval's fear had been real. But the murder had been personal. And that meant the answer wasn't in the transactions, but in the history. Something caught his eye. A letter dated nearly 2 decades ago, written in Alain Duval's neat script. "You always believed the past would stay buried, but some debts don't fade, Bernard. We both know that. If they come back, don't expect me to save you again." Marceau's pulse quickened. The phrasing wasn't about money, it was about something older, something shared between Letourneau and Duval. Something Letourneau must have tried to use as leverage before his death. He stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. There was one person who might know the answers, the only person who had seen both men at their worst. Pierre Lamarque sat in his study, glass of cognac in hand, when Marceau arrived. The businessman regarded him with a look of mild irritation, but there was something else in his eyes. A wariness. "You don't seem surprised to see me," Marceau said, stepping inside uninvited. Lamarque swirled his drink. "Should I be? The police don't know when to let a case die. That's because this one isn't solved." Marceau placed the letter on the table. "You were close to Alain for years. Tell me, what did he and Letourneau bury in their past?" Lamarque's expression didn't change, but his grip on the glass tightened slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marceau sat across from him. "Moreau didn't kill Alain. Someone else did, and they wanted it to look like a hit, like part of some financial dispute. But the truth is, it wasn't about that at all, was it? This goes back years. And you know exactly what I'm talking about." Lamarque sighed, setting his drink down. For a moment he was silent, as if weighing the risk of speaking. Then finally he said, "It was supposed to be over." Marceau leaned in. "What was?" Lamarque exhaled. 30 years ago, the three of us, me, Alain, and Bernard, were young and reckless. We had ambition but no patience. There was a deal, a bad one, something we weren't supposed to touch. Marceau waited. "There was a man," Lamarque continued, "Jean-Baptiste Arnaud. Powerful, dangerous. We crossed him in a way no one should." He hesitated. "And then one day he was gone. Just disappeared." Marceau's mind clicked into place. "You're saying you killed him?" Lamarque shook his head. "Not me, not Alain, but Bernard. Bernard was desperate. He thought it was the only way out." "And you covered it up?" Lamarque's gaze darkened. "We had no choice. If it had ever come to light, we'd have been finished." Marceau sat back. The past had never stayed buried. It had been festering beneath the surface for decades, and Letourneau, drowning in debts, had tried to sell the truth to someone. "Who else knew?" Marceau asked. Lamarque hesitated. "Only one other person." Marceau's pulse quickened. "Who?" Lamarque's voice was quiet. "Arnaud's son." The name hit Marceau like a slow-burning fuse. Jean-Baptiste Arnaud had vanished 30 years ago. But his son? His son had never stopped looking. Marceau stood abruptly. The case wasn't about old business deals or debts. It was revenge. Cold, patient revenge. And that meant the killer wasn't done yet. Marceau left Lamarque's estate with a storm brewing in his mind. The past had never stayed buried. It had only lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to surface. Arnaud's Son had never forgotten. And now 2 men were dead, and the real killer was still in the shadows. Sitting in his car, Marceau stared at the chess piece he had pocketed from the crime scene. The knight, its posture frozen mid-strike, was not just a symbol of strategy, it was a message, a game being played in the dark with moves only the killer understood. He turned the piece between his fingers, thinking of the one detail that didn't fit. The crime scenes had been staged, made to look like cold, calculated hits. But Moreau had been right about something. Duval's death had been personal, which meant the killer wasn't a professional. He was someone consumed by the past, someone who wanted revenge to be felt, not just carried out. Marceau needed a reaction. He needed to force the killer's hand. An idea took shape. It was reckless, but he had seen it work before. The next morning, the newspapers carried the headline, "Police close in on true mastermind of Duval murder. Breakthrough in old case." Marceau made sure it spread. He let it be known that new evidence had come to light, something tying the murders back to an event from 30 years ago. He made sure that whispers reached the right people, that the killer would hear what he wanted them to hear, that the police were closing in. Then he waited. Hours passed. Dupont checked in twice, asking if Marceau was sure about this gamble. "We could be making a lot of people nervous," he had muttered. "That's the point," Marceau had replied. By nightfall, the bait had worked. Marceau was at his desk when the call came in. The voice on the other end was tight, controlled, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "I hear you're looking for ghosts, Inspector." Marceau leaned back, gripping the phone. "Funny thing about ghosts," he said. "They never really go away." A pause, then a quiet chuckle. "And you think you've found one?" "I know I have." The voice lost its amusement. "Then you're closer than I thought." Marceau closed his eyes, picturing the game board. The killer had taken the bait, but he needed more. He needed them to slip. He exhaled, making his tone casual. "It's ironic, isn't it? All these years, searching, waiting. And in the end, the truth came from the people who thought they had buried it." Silence. The kind that wasn't hesitation, but calculation. Then the killer spoke, slower this time. "The truth," they repeated. "You're sure you have it?" Marceau let the moment stretch, then dropped the final piece of bait. "We have everything we need. The last witness has spoken." He heard it then, not words, but a breath, a sharp, involuntary inhale. The smallest crack in the deception. The killer hadn't known. They had expected silence, and now they would have to act. Marceau hung up, his pulse steady. The trap had been set. The next move would belong to the killer. Marceau didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, the glow of his desk lamp catching the rim of his coffee cup, his mind fixed on the call. The breath, the single involuntary reaction, told him everything he needed to know. The killer had been confident until that moment. Now they were afraid. He had them. But fear made people reckless. It made them desperate. And desperation could be dangerous. At dawn, he left the station, making his way toward the archive building on Rue Saint-Dominique. If the past held the key, then he needed to see what was left of the original case, the case that had been buried for 30 years. When he arrived, the building was unusually quiet. A single officer, Desjardins, was stationed at the front, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Marceau showed his badge. I need access to the old Arnaud files. Any movement on them in the last 24 hours? Desjardins frowned. No requests. Not since yesterday, when you had them pulled. Something was wrong. Marceau stepped inside, his shoes echoing against the tile as he made his way to the archive room. The air smelled of paper and dust, the scent of forgotten things, but the moment he stepped through the door, he saw it. The cabinet where the Arnaud case files had been kept was open. The lock had been forced. His stomach tightened. He scanned the room. The shelves were undisturbed. Nothing appeared out of place, except for the cabinet, standing slightly ajar. Slowly, he stepped forward and pulled it open. Empty. The files were gone. A sharp pulse of anger burned in his chest. Someone had been here. Someone had known exactly what he was looking for and had gotten to it first. He turned sharply, striding back toward Desjardins. Who else had access to this room? The officer blinked at his urgency. No one. I mean, other detectives have been in and out for other cases, but no one's requested anything on Arnaud. I would have... Marceau didn't wait for him to finish. He was already dialing Dupont. The call connected after 2 rings. Marceau! Dupont's voice was groggy, thick with sleep. The Arnaud files are gone. Silence. Then the rustle of movement. Gone? Someone broke in, took them before I could. Dupont swore under his breath. Damn it! Do we have any security footage? I'll check now. Marceau moved quickly, his mind racing ahead of him. The timing wasn't a coincidence. The moment he had forced the killer's hand, they had struck back. But this wasn't just about hiding evidence. No, if the killer had taken the files, it meant there was something in them that scared them, and fear always left a trail. When Marceau reached the security office, the officer on duty pulled up the footage. The grainy black-and-white screen flickered to life, showing the corridor leading to the archives. Marceau leaned in, eyes scanning the timestamps. Then, at 3:42 a.m., a figure appeared, tall, hooded, moving with precision. The figure stopped at the archive door, glancing once down the hall before producing something from their coat, a lockpick. Within seconds they were inside. The footage jumped. 30 seconds of static. Marceau exhaled sharply. They cut the camera, the officer muttered. Of course they did. Whoever this was, they knew what they were doing. But mistakes happened in moments of pressure. Marceau rewound, playing the footage again, this time watching the seconds before the camera cut. Then, just before the screen went dark, there. A glint of metal as the figure moved. A brief glimpse of their wrist catching the light. A watch. Distinctive. Engraved. Marceau felt his pulse quicken. He had seen that watch before, and now he knew exactly whose hand had stolen the past. Marceau stared at the frozen frame of the security footage, the watch. He had seen it up close just days ago, a gold case, a leather strap worn at the edges, an engraving too small to make out on the grainy footage, but clear enough in his memory. It belonged to Gérard Moreau. Marceau exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. Moreau had played the role of the informant, the bitter old detective whose instincts had been dismissed too many times. He had warned Marceau about the case, hinted at shadows too deep to uncover alone. And yet here was proof that he had taken the Arnaud files himself. Why? Before Marceau could dwell on it, his phone buzzed. He answered without checking the caller ID. A woman's voice, sharp and tense. "Inspector, you need to come to the Lamarck estate." Now! It was Camille Lamarck. Marceau's grip tightened. What happened? There's been another murder. The line went dead. Marceau was already moving. The estate was swarming with police by the time he arrived. The grand entrance, so still the last time he had visited, now pulsed with the movement of officers and crime scene techs. The air was thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth and something heavier beneath it, blood. Camille met him at the doorway, her face pale. She clutched a shawl around her shoulders. Though the night was warm, Marceau didn't waste time. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "Mathieu. He's dead." The words should have hit like a revelation, but they didn't. Mathieu Lamarque, the charming, smug businessman who had inherited his father's fortune, the man who had played coy when questioned, was now a victim. Marceau pushed past her, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. He didn't need directions. The officers had gathered near the study, and as he entered, the sight before him told him everything. Mathieu was slumped over his desk, his body twisted, at an awkward angle, blood seeping from a wound at the base of his skull. A heavy crystal paperweight lay on the floor, red-streaked and fractured from the impact. A murder weapon left in plain sight. Dupont stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, his expression grim. "No forced entry," he muttered as Marceau approached. "Whoever did this, he let them in." Marceau nodded, scanning the room. The mahogany desk was cluttered, as if there had been a struggle, but something caught his eye among the papers. A single playing card, the knight, the same symbol left. At Duval's crime scene, the pattern was clear now. This wasn't just about old grievances. The killer was following a design, moving pieces across a board only they could see. Marceau turned to Camille, who stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Well, when did you find him?" Her fingers dug into the fabric of her shawl. "An hour ago, I heard a noise, something heavy falling. When I came in, he was already like this." "Did you see anyone?" She shook her head. "No, the doors were locked. I don't know how someone got in." Marceau's mind worked quickly. If Mathieu had been killed so soon after the archive break-in, it meant one thing. Whatever Moreau had taken from the records had scared someone enough to kill again. He turned to Dupont. "We need to find Moreau, now." Dupont frowned. "You think he did this?" Marceau hesitated. If Moreau had killed Mathieu, it meant he wasn't just covering tracks. He was tying up loose ends. But there was still one problem. The night. If Moreau had been trying to hide the past, why continue the killer's pattern? Why draw more attention? Unless... Marceau's stomach twisted. Unless Moreau wasn't the killer. Unless Moreau had found something in those files, something damning enough that someone else had taken action before he could reveal it. And if that was true, then Moreau was already in danger. Marceau turned on his heel and rushed toward the door. The killer was still ahead of him, and if he didn't move fast, Moreau would be the next to die. Marceau's mind raced as he drove through the rain-slicked streets, his tires slicing through puddles as he pushed the car faster. Moreau had stolen the Arnaud files, that much was certain. But had he done so to protect himself, or had he uncovered something damning, something that had made him a target? The murders followed a pattern: Duval, Mathieu, and now Moreau, possibly next. But what was the connection? The night, the calling card left at each scene. A symbol that meant something to the killer, a thread tying everything together. His breath was steady, but his pulse pounded. He was close. He could feel it. When he arrived at Moreau's apartment, the street was quiet, the building's facade dark and unassuming. He killed the engine and stepped out, taking in the details. No signs of forced entry, no suspicious cars idling nearby. But that didn't mean he was safe. He pressed the buzzer. No answer. Marceau's jaw tightened. He tried again. Still nothing. Instinct took over. He tested the door. It gave way under his touch. Unlocked. He pulled his gun from its holster. As he stepped inside, his body tense. The apartment smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. A dim lamp flickered in the corner, casting long shadows against the walls. Moreau sat at the small kitchen table, motionless. For a split second, Marceau thought he was too late. Then Moreau's head lifted. His eyes, red-rimmed and weary, locked onto Marceau's with something between exhaustion and relief. "I knew you'd come," he rasped. Marceau lowered his gun but didn't put it away. "Where are the files?" Moreau exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Gone." The word was like a punch to the gut. Moreau gestured to the mess on the table, papers scattered, an overturned glass, and, in the center, a burnt scrap of what had once been a case file. "They came before you did," he said, "tore through everything, took what they needed, and destroyed the rest." Marceau's mind whirled. "Who?" Moreau gave a hollow chuckle. "You already know, don't you?" He did. He just needed to hear it. Moreau sighed. "Mathieu." Marceau's eyes narrowed. "Mathieu's dead." Moreau's lips pressed together. Then he nodded. "I know." The weight of his tone made Marceau pause. He had assumed Moreau would be shocked, but there was something else there, something deeper. Moreau reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, placing it on the table. A playing card. The knight. Marceau's blood ran cold. "This was left for me," Moreau said, quietly. "Slipped under my door before they broke in. A message." Marceau stared at the card. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a game, a deliberate move in a much larger scheme, and then it hit him. The knight wasn't just a calling card. It was a strategy. A piece in a game of chess, always positioned for an attack, always waiting for the right moment to strike. His breath caught as the pieces clicked together. He had been looking at it all wrong. The murders weren't random. The victims weren't just connected by an old case. They were being eliminated in a precise order, each move leading to the next, which meant there was still another move to be played. Marceau's stomach twisted. "Who's next?" Moreau didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, his eyes shadowed. "You already know that too." And he did, because the killer wasn't finished, and the next move was his. Marceau exhaled slowly, his breath steady despite the weight of realization pressing down on him. The pattern had emerged, and now the game had reached its most dangerous point. He turned the knight card over in his fingers, the edges worn from handling. The killer was methodical, precise, eliminating targets in a calculated order. But for what purpose? Moreau was watching him, waiting. There was no arrogance in his gaze, only resignation. He knew as well as Marceau did that the answer was close, just beyond the veil of what they understood. Marceau's voice was quiet but firm. "Tell me everything," Moreau sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It started with Arnaud." The name carried weight. Marcel Arnaud, a respected judge, found dead in a supposed accident 5 years ago. The case had been closed quickly, but now it was clear. Arnaud hadn't been a victim of fate. He had been the first move. Moreau reached for a cigarette, lighting it with a steady hand. Arnaud wasn't clean. He was covering for people, keeping certain cases buried. But He got sloppy. Someone started digging. He exhaled a stream of smoke. That someone was Duval? Duval, the first murder in the current case, the journalist who had been found dead with the night card beside him. Marceau had assumed Duval had simply stumbled onto something dangerous, but now it was clear Duval had been pulling at a thread connected to something much larger. Moreau continued. Mathieu was next, but not because of what you think. He wasn't just some rich heir caught in the middle. His lips pressed into a thin line. He was orchestrating it. Marceau's stomach tightened. Mathieu was the one behind the
Murders? Moreau shook his head. No, but he was trying to control the outcome. The Arnaud case wasn't just about corruption, it was about blackmail. There was something in those files, something he wanted to keep hidden.
The pieces were coming together, but the full picture remained just out of reach. Marceau leaned forward. What was in the files? Moreau's expression darkened. A name. Marceau's fingers curled against the table. Whose? Moreau hesitated, then, barely above a whisper, Camille Lamarque. The air between them shifted. Marceau felt the impact of those words like a physical force. Camille. The grieving sister? The woman who had called him when Mathieu was murdered. The one person who had seemed more victim than suspect. Marceau's
mind raced, pulling at memories, dissecting moments that suddenly took on new meaning. The way she had been so willing to help, but only at certain times. The way she had appeared just when the case needed another push forward. The way she had
found Mathieu's body. It had all seemed natural at the time. But was it? Moreau was watching him closely. I don't think she's the killer, he said carefully. But I do think she knows more than she's let on. Marceau nodded slowly. If Camille had been in those files, then the killer had either wanted to protect her or to use her as part of the game. Either way, she was at the center of it. He pushed back from the table, standing. Where is she now? Moreau shook his head. I don't know. Marceau didn't waste another second. He turned, heading for the door. He had to find her, because whether she was the next victim or the final piece of the puzzle, one thing was clear. The game wasn't over yet. The city was quiet, wrapped in a heavy silence that only deepened as Marceau made his way toward Camille's apartment. His mind was sharp, his instincts humming with the certainty that this was it, the final move in a game that had played out over years. He didn't know if Camille was the killer, a victim, or something in between, but one thing was certain. She had answers. His gun was cold in his grip as he climbed the stairs. He had called ahead, but there had been no response. He wasn't surprised. Camille had vanished the moment Moreau mentioned her name. That alone spoke volumes. The hallway stretched before him, dimly lit, the air thick with something unspoken. He reached her door, knocked once, no answer. Then he tried the handle. Unlocked, a chill crawled up his spine. He stepped inside, silent, controlled. The apartment was dark, save for the glow of a single lamp in the corner. Papers were strewn across the coffee table, notes, articles, files. The same ones that had been stolen from Moreau. And then he saw her. Camille stood by the window, her back to him, shoulders tense. She had known he would come. Marceau's voice was steady. It's over. She turned slowly, her face unreadable. Is it? There was no fear in her eyes, only exhaustion. Marceau took a step forward. You knew about the Arnaud case. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I knew more than that. He nodded. You knew about Mathieu's involvement. You knew about Duval. A pause. And you knew about the night. Something flickered in her expression. Something distant, buried. I did, she admitted. Marceau kept his gaze on her. You left the cards. Her lips parted, then pressed together. Yes. A beat of silence. The weight of it settled between them. Marceau tightened his grip on his gun. Why? She exhaled, shaking her head. Because they deserved it. The words were calm, too calm. Marceau's pulse remained steady, but inside everything clicked into place. The pattern, the precision, the methodical nature of the killings. Camille
hadn't just known about the murders, she had orchestrated them. His voice was quiet. You killed them. She didn't flinch, didn't deny it. She took a slow step forward, and for the first time he saw it. The truth in her eyes, cold and unrepentant. I didn't just kill them, detective. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile.
I made sure they suffered. Marceau inhaled deeply, steadying himself against the weight of her confession. The final move had been played, and she had lost. Marceau remained still, his gun steady, his breathing controlled. Camille's confession had come too easily. No resistance, no attempt at deception. She had laid the truth before him like a perfectly played card. And yet something was wrong. She was too calm, too willing. You made sure they suffered, he repeated, his voice measured. Why? Camille tilted her head slightly, studying him as though the answer was obvious. Because they ruined lives. Because they thought they could control everything. Who lived, who died, who mattered. I gave them what they deserved. Marceau didn't blink. And the night? She let out a soft breath as if amused. A symbol. Chess is a game of power. Detective. The knight moves differently than the others. It doesn't take the obvious path. The words sent something sharp through his mind. He had been so close, but there was still a piece missing. You left the cards, he said. But you weren't playing alone. Her eyes darkened, and for the first time he saw hesitation. Marceau felt it then, that quiet shift in the air. The moment when everything tilts just before the final drop. Someone else had been pulling the strings. You wanted them dead, he said carefully, watching her every flicker of movement. But you weren't the one who killed them. Silence. Then so faint he almost didn't hear it, a whisper of movement behind him. Marceau turned in an instant, instincts firing, gun rising. Too late. A heavy impact struck his side, sending
him staggering forward. Camille barely moved as he crashed against the table, pain flaring through his ribs.
His gun clattered across the floor. A shadow loomed over him. Moreau, his old friend, his ally, standing there, a small iron poker gripped in his hand, his face a mask of something unreadable. Camille's expression didn't change. She simply sighed. Took you long enough. Marceau forced himself upright, gripping the edge of the table, his mind racing through possibilities. Moreau. He had been there from the start, feeding him information, steering him in the right direction, but never too fast, never too close. He exhaled, tasting copper. It was you. Moreau's lips pressed together in something like regret. You were never supposed to figure it out. Camille folded her arms. He's smarter than you gave him credit for. Marceau ignored the pain, forcing his breathing into even strides. You killed them, he said, watching Moreau. She wanted revenge, but you were the one who made it happen. Moreau didn't answer. He didn't need to. Marceau glanced at Camille. How long have you known? She shrugged. Since the beginning. He was the perfect hand to play, a cop willing to bend the rules, someone who could be in the right place.
At the right time. She met Marceau's gaze. Someone you trusted. The weight of it settled into his chest. Moreau exhaled slowly. I didn't do it for her. Marceau's eyes narrowed. Moreau's fingers tightened around the iron poker.
You don't get it, do you? His voice was quiet, controlled. This was never about revenge, not really. Marceau let the silence stretch, waiting. And then Moreau said, this was about cleaning house. Marceau stilled. Moreau met his gaze, something unreadable behind his eyes. Arnaud, Mathieu, Duval, they were all part of the same rot. Camille wanted justice. But me? A slow exhale. I wanted control. A chill swept through Marceau's veins. Camille had been the
face of vengeance, but Moreau?
Moreau had been playing his own game, and Marceau had been his final opponent. Marceau felt the weight of Moreau's words settle in the room like a thick fog. Cleaning house. It wasn't revenge, not justice, it was power. Moreau had been eliminating those who stood in his way, using Camille's vendetta as a convenient smokescreen, and Marceau, for all his instincts, had nearly played right into his hands. Camille turned to Moreau, arms crossed, unimpressed. So that's what this was to you? A power play? Moreau didn't flinch. You got what you wanted, didn't?
You? Marceau's mind raced. He was unarmed, his ribs ached from the blow, and Moreau had the advantage. But Moreau also had something else, a need for control, and control could be broken. Marceau straightened, ignoring the sharp protest of
pain. Tell me, Moreau, he said, his voice steady. What's your next move? Moreau's grip on the iron poker tightened just slightly. A small detail, but enough. He hadn't planned this far ahead. He had expected Marceau to follow the trail, to corner Camille, to close the case, never realizing that the true final act belonged to him. Camille smirked. He's right, you know. You were playing the game well, but you got greedy. Moreau's jaw tightened. You needed me to find the bodies, Marceau continued. You needed me to see what she had done, because without that you had no leverage.
Over her. If I never pieced it together, she could have walked away. And then what? He took a slow step forward. Then you would have had nothing.
Moreau's face darkened. You always did talk too much. Marceau felt his pulse steady, a familiar calm settling over him. And you always underestimated me. The distant wail of sirens broke the silence. Moreau's eyes flickered, just a fraction of hesitation. Enough, Marceau lunged. Moreau swung the iron poker, but Marceau had already closed the distance. Pain flared through his side as the weapon struck his shoulder, but he didn't stop. He twisted, using Moreau's momentum against him, sending them both crashing to the ground. Camille moved in a blur, kicking the poker away. Moreau struggled, but Marceau pinned him, his grip unrelenting. It's over. The sirens grew louder, blue lights flashing against the windows. Moreau let out a slow, frustrated breath. You don't understand, do you? Marceau held firm. Enlighten me. Moreau's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Someone always takes control in the end. The words sent a chill down Marceau's spine, but he didn't let go. The police stormed in moments later, weapons drawn, orders
shouted. Marceau didn't move until Moreau was in cuffs. Only then did he let himself exhale. Camille watched silently as Moreau was led away, her expression unreadable.
Then she turned to Marceau. "So what happens to me?" Marceau studied her for a long moment. "That depends." She arched a brow. "On what?" "On whether you want to run." Her lips twitched. "And if I did?" Marceau glanced at the opened window, the darkened streets beyond. "I'd have to stop you." Camille considered that, then exhaled softly. "I think I'm tired of running." The sirens faded, the case was closed. But as Marceau stood there, watching the night stretch out before him, he couldn't shake Moreau's final words. Someone always takes control in the end, and in the quiet, unanswered questions remained. Marceau stood in the dim glow of the street lamp, watching as Moreau was shoved into the back of the police car. The man's expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes lingered, a quiet amusement, a secret he wasn't ready to part with. The door slammed shut and the car pulled away, leaving only the echo of tires against wet pavement. Camille stood beside him, arms crossed, her gaze following the departing vehicle. "That was too easy," she murmured. Marceau exhaled. "It rarely is." And yet she was right. The pieces had fallen into place. Moreau had orchestrated the deaths, manipulated Camille's vendetta, and tried to wipe his slate clean. A power
move. A ruthless, calculated strategy. But as Marceau replayed their final confrontation, something nagged at him, a thread still loose in the weave. Moreau's last words. "Someone always takes control in the end." It hadn't been a plea, nor an excuse. It had been a warning.
Marceau turned to Camille. "When did Moreau start working with Fontaine?" She frowned. "Years ago, before I even knew his name." "Then why did Fontaine seem so disposable?" Camille's lips parted slightly, but no answer came. Because Fontaine had never been the real piece on the board. Moreau had let Marceau chase that lead, let him uncover the connections, let him think he was closing in. But Fontaine's death. Moreau had barely flinched, as if it were an inconvenience, as if he had expected it. Marceau's pulse quickened. Did Moreau know he would be caught? Camille blinked. "You're saying he planned for this?" The thought should have been absurd. Moreau had fought back. He had resisted. But even in cuffs, he had seemed composed, amused. Someone always takes control in the end. A chill ran through Marceau. What if Moreau wasn't the one in control? He turned sharply, scanning the faces of the officers, the bystanders lingering in the dark. No one looked out of place. No one looked back at him. But the air felt heavier, thick with something unseen. Marceau. He looked at Camille. She shook her head, an edge of something almost like regret in her eyes. "If you go looking, you won't stop." She wasn't wrong. The case was closed. Moreau was behind bars. Justice, in its imperfect way, had been served. But justice and truth weren't the same, and Marceau knew, that he was only staring at the surface of something far deeper. His fingers curled around his lighter, the metal cool against his skin. A habit, a reflex, something to ground him. Camille sighed. "And if I told you to walk away?" He let the flame flicker once before snapping it shut. "I'd ask if you really thought that was possible." A small, almost fond smile tugged at her lips. "No, I suppose not." The night stretched before them, quiet but not still. Somewhere beyond the glow of the street lamps, in the spaces between the solved and the unsolved, the next move was already being made, and Marceau would be there when it came.